From the Alvin and Rosalie Sarachek studio, PBS Kansas presents Kansas Week.
The former Marion police chief makes his first court appearance since leading a raid on a local newspaper. There are new developments in the Textron aviation strike in Wichita. The same week, workers get a visit from their national union president. The Wichita School Board declares 3 schools to be surplus and of no use to the district. We'll discuss what that means and how it factors into the proposed $450 million facilities plan and the upcoming bond issue. But first, the civil case involving a Wichita teenager who died while in custody moves forward, but with some changes. That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. Hello and welcome to Kansas Week. I'm Jared Cerullo. The lawsuit filed by the family of a Wichita teenager who died in custody during a scuffle with deputies will move forward. A federal judge made that ruling this week, but he did throw out 2 of the complaints against the deputies involved. Cake's Pilar Pedraza brings us up to date.
You may remember it was September 3 years ago when Cedric Lofton died after he got into a fight with detention deputies at the Juvenile Intake and Assessment Center. They held him down on the ground on his stomach until he was unresponsive. An autopsy concluded his death was a homicide. When the DA said state law prevented him from filing charges, Lofton's brother sued the deputies. The deputies asked the judge to summarily dismiss all the complaints in the lawsuit. The judge dismissed 2 of them. In the filing, Judge Eric Melgren concluded the Lofton family didn't have enough evidence or supporting court cases to overcome qualified immunity on the complaint the deputies were deliberately indifferent to Lofton's serious medical needs. The judge also dropped the claim the deputies were negligent, agreeing with the Sedgwick County DA. State law protects the deputies even if they, quote, abused their discretion. The rest of the lawsuit, though, moves forward, with Melgren saying there were serious questions of fact still to be figured out. For example, the filing says when Wichita police first dropped Lofton off, they told the detention deputies he showed signs of acute illness that appear to need immediate medical care and signs of intoxication with significant impairment. But after learning they would then need a medical release, an officer said, "We are going to go with no." As for whether the deputies used excessive force, the filing reports the deputies saying Lofton was fighting them the entire time they were holding him down on the floor. Lofton's brother says he was under control within 5 minutes. The judge says, based on the silent and slightly obstructed video the sheriff released, it's hard to tell when Lofton was legally under control, adding, realistically, the truth likely lies somewhere in the middle.
Pilar Pedraza reporting there. Here to discuss this and some of this week's other big stories, I'm joined by Wichita School Board member Melody McCrae-Miller and publisher of the Cowley Courier Traveler newspaper, David Seaton. Thank you both for joining us this week. Melody, I'll start with you on this one, a former county commissioner yourself. From a governmental standpoint, I'm sure you can sympathize with your former colleagues about how they have to deal with this situation, tragic situation.
This has absolutely been a tragic situation, and unfortunately it's taken this long to get this type of a response. The family had to go the route of suing the deputies personally as opposed to the original route that they were attempting to go. From a governmental perspective, I believe that what needs to be thought about is how it is that we've come to this conclusion that using this type of force is appropriate, particularly when the individual that is in front of you that is presenting these characteristics of what they thought was impairment or what they knew was some sort of health concern. So I think that it's a larger, deeper issue for the county to reckon with, and that is what are the methods behind how we approach these types of situations? Because obviously this one was very inappropriate in how they reacted to it, and thus they are being sued.
And there's long been an observation, especially from the African American and minority communities around Wichita and Sedgwick County, that the law enforcement community is not held responsible in many of these cases, not only this case, but many use of force cases. The DA, I think, I may be wrong here, but I remember the district attorney, a story about the district attorney hasn't charged a single officer in more than 30 years in any of the use of force cases. How does that stand?
Well, it doesn't stand well within the community. I don't believe it stands well with those that are even in those governmental positions right now, particularly when you're being sued for this. I think about George Floyd, and of course there are so many others that have come before him and after him. So the fact that you're putting a person in this prone position, which you know is going to impair their breathing, is going to cause them some arrest, then you really should think twice about it. It's not just the African American community that's looking at this, even though we are, when you look at it from a numbers perspective, we are definitely those that are disproportionately impacted by what we would call biased policing, what we would also look at as just inappropriate and hurtful and impactful. So yeah, this type of policing has been going on, it continues to happen, and hopefully the suits will rise to the occasion that not only would we have to sue personally and or civilly, but that our governments, and I am talking about the DA, the District Attorney's Office, that they would be able to look at this with an unbiased eye and say, our officers were in the wrong, we need to do this differently, and we need to perform better than this. We are better than this.
And Jared, this raises this whole issue of qualified immunity. You know,
Yeah.
I think the George Floyd Act that Biden tried to pass early in the administration would have gotten rid of or reduced that ability of police officers and other government officials to say, well, you know, we were just acting within the bounds, and so you can't, of our duties, and you can't sue us, even though there was harm caused. So, but it looks like in this case, the judge sort of overcame that a little bit by saying, hey, there's contradictory evidence here. You're saying you weren't lying on his back or pushing him down, but the medical evidence shows that you might have been, and he may have been not struggling for as long as they said he was struggling. And
In a straitjacket, no less, basically.
Yeah. And it also, to me, kind of makes me wonder about the DA's decision, because he said, well, they're struggling for 30 minutes or whatever it was, and so they're protected by a stand your ground law. Well, doesn't appear maybe that they were struggling that long too. So lots of questions being raised.
Yeah. From a media standpoint, do you think the media has done a good job of covering this event over the last couple of years?
Well, I haven't paid, being not in the Wichita area, I haven't paid very close attention to it, but I did read up on it, and I think pretty good. I'd like to see some more reporting on, well, the county said, or the jail or the detention facility said, we're going to look at our policies, and because this was a tragedy, and see what we can do better. And I'm not sure if we've reported on any of that, whether there's been any change or follow-up in that area.
Understood. And now also, Melody, one last question. We have there's another case here in Wichita where a police officer has just been basically exonerated, and we find out he struck a pedestrian.
I saw that.
While driving, and we find out he was using his computer while driving, and so now we have another very unfortunate case as well.
You know, this just raises the issue of it is the immunity, policing and law enforcement, and the immunity clauses that we have had in place for decades, quite honestly. And so the question becomes, what are we trying to hide here? Yeah. What are we trying to, honestly, what are we trying to cover up?
Or who are we trying to protect?
And who are we, well, we see who we're trying to protect. So the reason is why? Why does just one entity need that protection? Because the rest of our community is basically laid open to it, and there are no real consequences.
All right, we'll move on. That's certainly a story we'll keep following. 3 recently closed Wichita public school buildings are now considered surplus property. This week, upon recommendation from Superintendent Kelly Bielfeld, The school board decided the district had no use for 3 recently closed school buildings. Those are Clark and Payne Elementary Schools and Jardine Middle School. They were among 6 schools closed in May. If approved by the state, the Wichita district can move forward with trying to sell or donate those buildings for other community uses. But this comes as the school officials gear up for a major bond issue campaign. As we discussed last week, the $450 million facilities plan would extend the mill levy still being paid on the 2008 bond issue for another 20 years. If that bond issue fails, the owner of a $200,000 home would actually see about a $173 cut in their annual property taxes by 2029. And Melody, I'll start with you again as a current USD 259 school board member. I'm sure you have a lot to say about this. We discussed this last week, and we had former state BOE member Walt Chappell on as a guest, and he is notoriously conservative Republican, and he doesn't make any bones about that. But he mentioned a couple of things that I wanted you to kind of respond to. He told us that the district has never had a $42 million deficit, and that USD 259 does not have $1.2 billion in deferred maintenance. Is his claim accurate or not?
Well, my question, and I know Walt well, we've worked together on at several occasions, particularly on bias policing. So what I say to Walt is, where's the evidence? How do you fact check that? The fact is, yes, we did have a $42 million deficit, and secondary, yes, we do still have deferred maintenance that is running in the realm of, I'd say, 1.9 to $2 billion. Think about this. We have approximately 84 buildings, 88 programs, and those buildings, I'd say the average age is 60. So when you look at the maintenance that it takes in order to continue to have those buildings up to code so that we can educate children adequately, it takes millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. So to both the claims that Walt Chappell has made, I would say needs to be fact checked, and the facts are, yes, we did have the 42 million, which we were able to resolve.
And you know, I think we'd be hard pressed to find any school district, not only Wichita, but pretty much any school district, at least in Wichita and Sedgwick County, the metropolitan area, that does not have a bond issue on their tax rolls. Mm-hmm. So, getting very basic here, a question that I have always thought of is, the state is supposed to fund schools adequately. Mm-hmm. Why do we continue to have this need over and over and over from all districts to put bond issues on their tax rolls, it seems, every single time they need one?
I totally agree with you. As a former legislator, education is paramount for the state of Kansas. All you have to do is read the statutes. All you have to do is read our Constitution. Education comes foremost, front and center. And the majority of our school districts are going to receive funding from the state. And we also know that the state has been sued, not once, not twice, but more than that times, in order for us to be able to actually adequately fund our school districts, which, remember, are paramount. That's right. What we're here for, is to educate. So what the state has done in the past is, from a special education, I'm going to focus on special education. Sure. Because special education is our largest budget item because of whom it is that we are actually educating and how much it costs. We're not just educating individuals from the Wichita area. We're educating special education students from all across our state. That, in and of itself, requires us to expend general funds because we are not being funded appropriately, adequately, at the level that the constitutional statutes state for special education funding. when we dip into our general funds, what is that going to do? Just like at home with your own checkbook,
You're going to be robbing Peter
you're going
to
to be
pay
robbing
Paul.
Peter to
Yeah.
pay Paul.
Yeah.
So that is what school districts, and specifically USD 259, which happens to be the largest school district in the state, has had to do over years. So understanding that, we have taken 15, almost 16 years to put forward what we know our students need and deserve, and that is a bond issue, so that we can adequately size down our district, because our attendance has gone down, and by looking at birth projections, it's not going to rise
Right.
more than likely. So we are adequately and effectively lasering and looking at how do we do this with funds that not only that we currently have, but by actually doing a bond issue, which is $450 million. And that's what our facility master plan is all about.
And the last thing I want to touch on before I'll move over to David here real quickly is the district's own, speaking of fact checking, the district's own records and statistics show that student achievement since the 2008 bond issue has not risen at all. The district promised voters that with the passage of the 2008 bond issue, which is ending now, that student achievement would rise.
Sure.
How can you promise the voters that it will rise now when
Sure.
it hasn't
Sure.
previously over the previous bond?
And that's a fair question. That is an absolute fair question. What we can do is promise that we are putting into place all the possible tools, interventions that we can in order to facilitate our student academics rising. We can't promise, I'd say, we can't promise that that will happen, but we can promise that with this bond issue, we will put into play the tools, which are going to be the edifices, the buildings, the structures, so that it's appropriate in terms of how it educates. When you look at the size of our classrooms, when you look at modes of technology that we would be able to offer in order to compare with all of our other suburban school districts that we have around us, we would be able to do that, but we would also be able to employ appropriate interventions, credentialed teachers that we know will lead to an increase in our academic performance.
All right. Good talk. I'm sure we'll be talking about that more coming before February as well, as it will go to voters.
Yes.
So, all right, we'll move on. Negotiations resumed Thursday between union officials and Textron Aviation in the ongoing strike by machinists at Cessna and Beach. This comes just a few days after the president of the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers came from Washington to join the picket line. 4 weeks ago, workers rejected a 26% wage increase that the company was offering in a new multi-year contract. David Seaton, I'll start with you. You have, granted, you're down in Winfield, Cowley County, our Kansas City area, but I'm sure there are some people that commute between, that area. How is this, or do you think this is affecting your community down there, and how?
Well, I'm not sure. I haven't heard a lot of talk about it yet, but as it goes on, it certainly could. I think we've several thousand workers on strike, and as I understand it, too, the workers also have lost their health insurance now too, so they've got to deal with that. And then we talked earlier about how there's the Boeing strike that could be reverberating and have some consequences here in Wichita. So whatever we say down there, we're kind of under the shadow of Wichita. So whatever happens here affects us for sure.
But the trickle down effect from this could surely have an effect on the entire South Central Kansas economy.
Yeah,
though.
it could. So hopefully they get this strike resolved pretty quickly, like they did with the dock worker strike and some of the other strikes, because it certainly could. My kind of questions about this is what specifically are the workers demanding? At least from the reporting, I'm sort of wondering what exactly do they want. They want better, benefits and pay and all that. And Textron has put out this exactly what they're offering. Sort of sounds good, but if you look at it in broader context, you sort of wonder, well, based on their revenues, their profits, what are their executives making? What are these folks used? The stability of the factory job in Kansas, in the United States, is not what it used to be. In our town, in our city, used to be a union town. All the factories were unionized. People made good wages, and they could, support a large family. It's really not that way anymore. But these still are really pretty good union jobs, and they're fighting to kind of keep that era in place when you could support a family. So it'll be interesting to see. Hopefully, they'll resolve it pretty soon. It'll be interesting to see if the company actually bends a little bit.
Yeah. And we did see on the East Coast the longshoremen strike. Those companies did bend a little bit, which was good. Those workers got what they wanted. So, do you think that's having an effect on the workers here?
There's no doubt that that's having an effect on workers all over the nation. Workers are feeling their power, and that's because they should have power. They're the ones that are bringing all of these, and I'm thinking about longshoremen right now, that are making sure that we have all of these gadgets and everything else that we want in our homes, what we can purchase in the stores. So they know the power and they know the connection that they have. That's no different here. I will talk, when I'm talking with persons, they say, we're the ones that are making these planes, putting the pieces together in order to make sure that you can fly in a plane that hopefully is safe and sound. One other thing, though, is that we know, when you watch markets, we know that aviation has not been in a turn down. And in fact, they are going up in terms of their earnings. So when you look at it from an earnings perspective, earnings during, I would say, the COVID, because we're coming out of the COVID years. I know we're out of the COVID years, but earnings were tied to margins, and margins are tied to how many people. It's personnel, quite honestly. So we need to be able to recognize where our bread is buttered,
right.
And it is going to be with personnel, and they do know that they should be able to have some effect, and some of the residuals from the earnings and the profits that the larger corporations are receiving should trickle down to those that are making that company happen.
I think from a PR standpoint, the union should, the striking workers should emphasize that, because from the coverage I've seen, I don't see that too well. If that's correct, which undoubtedly it probably is, but so from a PR standpoint, I think that's sort of the tactic they should take more. Yeah.
All right. The former Marion police chief appeared in court for the first time since leading the raid on the Marion County Record newspaper. Cake's Jocelyn Schifferdecker reports the defense team is asking the public to reserve judgment until all the facts are revealed.
Former Marion Police Chief Gideon Cody walked into the Marion County District Courthouse Monday afternoon to face charges.
Everyone, please be seated.
Cody now charged with interfering with a judicial procedure and inducing a witness to withhold or delay information in a felony case. His attorney is asking the public to let the process unfold before it forms an opinion.
Take a minute to reserve judgment, take a minute to avoid jumping to conclusions, and allow the system to work.
In August 2023, the tiny town of Marion, Kansas gained national attention when police, led by Chief Gideon Cody, raided the Marion County Record's newsroom. Investigators also searched the houses of the newspaper's publisher and a reporter. Several lawsuits followed the raid. Police were investigating whether the newspaper was using a local business owner's personal information to get driver's license records. A later investigation showed the paper did nothing wrong. Newspaper editor Eric Meyer says it's been a tough year.
Difficult, hard. It's been somewhat reassuring in the sense that the public has come back and sided with us.
Meyer doesn't know what exactly justice looks like. He says there are more people than just Cody who need to be held accountable, telling reporters he hopes for more stability.
Somewhere the system failed. These are the people who are supposed to protect our rights. They didn't do it.
And David Seaton, I'll start with you on this one. I'm pretty sure you've been following this one. It's been a rough story for reporters to cover themselves because we're kind of dealing with themselves, you know?
Yeah, it's been quite a saga, this deal. And I mean, the attorney's right. The former police chief deserves the benefit of the doubt because you're presumed innocent. But man, there's so a mountain of evidence already out that that this guy was trying to retaliate against the newspaper for unfavorable coverage that was about to come out and other reasons. What the free press interest is kind of upset about is that there really hasn't been that much accountability. He's being charged with one minor felony for telling somebody to delete some text messages, when it seems pretty clear that they found a tiny bit of evidence based on a misinterpretation of a conversation with a state official and plowed ahead with seizing a newspaper. I mean, this is stuff out, in Cuba and Russia and China that you hear about.
Yeah.
And there's some stuff that the state could do, like, well, there was one idea that a magistrate was the one that signed off on this search warrant.
Yes.
Well, maybe let's not have magistrates do that because they might not be as informed about actual district judges. That's a minor thing, but nothing really has been done other than these lawsuits by the journalists themselves and this minor charge. And so we'd like to see, there has been some accountability. He's gone. There's other officials that are gone too who also seem to have a vendetta against the newspaper, but we really need to stand up and roar about, we can't have this in our country.
Absolutely. And these are things that reporters do on a daily. I've been a reporter my entire life, and we're trying to dig up information, no matter whether it's good or bad. These are things that reporters are doing on a daily basis that public information, needs to remain public.
The reporter involved, did nothing wrong. She was trying to verify some information she got about what was possibly some criminal activity or very relevant activity going on with the city of Marion and a license to get a liquor license, and so it was all legitimate stuff, and it's really pretty sad how all the fallout from it.
And I admit myself, when I first saw this story, that I thought maybe it was just small town politics or whatever, but that turned out not to be the case. So we'll see how this plays out as well. That'll be the last word because we are running out of time. And once again, I want to thank our guests, Melody McCrae-Miller and David Seaton, for being here. And also a big thanks to Cake and KSN for sharing their stories with us. Our email address is kansasweek@kpts.org. Send us a message. Tell us what you would like. I'm Jared Cerullo. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.